During the history of war, there has been loads of mistakes that have changed the course of history. And that's why in today's video, we're going to be going over the biggest mistakes ever made in war. Starting things off in the closing months of World War I. The closing months of World War I were described as hell. And British soldier Henry James Tandy was both in World War I and World War II, but obviously World War II hadn't happened yet. He received the Victoria Cross, which is the highest medal that you can achieve in the British forces, and he was the second most highly decorated private of World War I, which is absolutely insane. Henry was a fantastic soldier, but he may have made the biggest mistake out of any soldier in that war. As mentioned before, it was the closing months of World War I, but obviously the soldiers didn't know this. It was brutal, it was muddy, it was chaotic, and it was a horrible place to be for any man in the war. And amid the battles, a British soldier, aka Henry, was walking through the battlegrounds with bodies laying next to him left and right. And as he was doing this, he was scanning for threats, trying to find any enemy soldiers to try and take them out. And amongst all of this, with the gunshots flying and bodies to the left and right of him, he saw a lone German soldier. The soldier was wounded, he was beaten, his uniform was ripped to shreds. He looked exhausted and like he was ready to give up. And Henry, he raised his rifle and aimed it at the German soldier, but decided not to shoot. And in that moment, he had every right to shoot and end the life of this German soldier, but he decided not to do it. Now, Henry again was a fantastic soldier and was admired by thousands, but this time he decided not to take out the enemy. So instead of shooting the German soldier, he lowered his weapon and let the German soldier go on his way. Now, Henry thought nothing of this for years. Even after the war ended, he felt good about not killing this German soldier because this German soldier could go and live his own life. But then that's when World War II rolled around. And that's when Henry realised the soldier he didn't kill ended up being Adolf Hitler. Obviously at the time, Henry had no idea how much of an evil person Adolf Hitler would turn out to be, or even who Adolf Hitler was. But I'm sure if he could turn back the time and take that shot, saving millions of lives, he definitely would have. But again, none of this was Henry's fault, because how would he have ever have known how evil that man would have turned out to be? But imagine he did take that shot. The rise of Germany could have been completely different. There might have not even been a World War II. The butterfly effect is absolutely insane. Next up, we have Napoleon's decision to invade Russia. Now, Napoleon is one of the greatest war minds in history. He conquered so many countries, it's absolutely insane. But his invasion of Russia in 1812 may have been one of the most catastrophic events that could have ever happened to France. At the height of Napoleon's power, he controlled pretty much the entirety of Europe, but he wanted more. And when Tsar Alexander refused to fully comply with the economic blockade of Britain alongside France, then France decided to invade Russia. Napoleon chose force, and Napoleon assembled the largest army the world had ever seen at the time of 600,000 troops. These troops spoke dozens of languages. They all weren't just French, because as mentioned before, Napoleon pretty much ruled all of Europe. And they all marched east, confident that Russia would fall. But the Russians refused to play by Napoleon's rules. They didn't want to stand there and just have a fight. They retreated back into Russia. They deliberately abandoned their cities, destroyed food supplies, so it made it harder for Napoleon's men to survive. And every mile that Napoleon's men stepped further into the Russian land was a mile further into their trap. This turned what should have been a rapid war into a slow, agonizing death. Thousands died of hunger, disease, malnutrition, and even exhaustion. And when the two armies finally met at Borodino, it was one of the bloodiest battles in all of history. Now, Napoleon technically won, but he kinda didn't. So him and his men marched on to Moscow. And it was here in Moscow where they were expecting a surrender from the Russian troops, but they got anything but that. The city was already in flames and abandoned by the Russians. Now, this was catastrophic for Napoleon and his men because they had no shelter. They also had no supplies and they had no political leverage. They were trapped in a ruined, burning city with winter soon approaching. And winter in Russia is no joke. And Napoleon hesitated too long to order his retreat, so once he did want to retreat, it was already too late. The Russian winter delivered the final blow, killing hundreds of thousands of men. By the time all of the survivors got out of Russia, there was roughly 100,000 men that had survived, meaning 500,000 of Napoleon's army were gone. Now, in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't sound absolutely horrible because he still owned all of this land in Europe, but he didn't anymore because this sort of formed a coalition against Napoleon and France, and they pretty much lost all their land. And this war led to Napoleon's exile and pretty much the end of his empire. The one thing that Napoleon overlooked ended up being his end. Moving on to the priest that saved a 4-year-old. Yeah, I don't know how this is a story, but it actually is. It changed the course of history. This 4-year-old child was just having fun and just having a nice little day when they slipped in the River Inn. And the river's current was incredibly strong and the child began to drown. Now I bet you're wondering, how has this changed the course of history? Well, as the child's drowning, a priest jumps in and saves the child from drowning, which is obviously a good thing. Right? There was no doubt in the priest's mind that this child would have died if he didn't jump in and save them. So this just sounds like a great story, right? This sounds amazing. But no, it was Adolf Hitler. It was a 4-year-old Adolf Hitler in this river that was drowning and was saved by a priest. Now, this is the question for me to you. 4-year-old Adolf Hitler, you're a time traveller, you go back in time and you're in the body of this priest. Would you save Adolf Hitler? Or would you let the 4-year-old child drown? This is probably the craziest question I've ever asked on my YouTube channel, but it's true. Like, what do? Like, you either watch a 4-year-old drown who hasn't done anything wrong yet. He's literally 4 years old. They haven't done anything. He did loads of things wrong in later life, but he hasn't done that yet. Or do you save the 4-year-old child knowing what he will do later on in life? Like, let me know what you do in the comments down below. But that's mental. That literally changed the course of history. Next up, we have the Japanese attacks on Pearl Harbor. As we know, at the end of World War II, Japan had 2 bombs dropped on them by the United States of America, one on Nagasaki and one on Hiroshima. But why did this start? Well, on December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was a lagoon harbor off of Hawaii, and it was seen as a very important strategical standpoint to the United States of America, and Japan just couldn't have that. So on the morning of December 7th, they attacked Pearl Harbor, completely catching the United States of America off guard. And tactically, the attack worked. It was a great attack for the Japanese standpoint, but the repercussions obviously didn't. Ships burned, planes were destroyed, and nearly 2,400 Americans were killed. But strategically, this was a disaster for the Japanese. The most crucial American assets weren't on Pearl Harbor. The aircraft carriers were not on port and they were untouched, which was a massive no for the Japanese. And Japan missed a lot of key machinery which would allow the United States of America to recover quite quickly. And even more damaging to the Japanese is it unified the United States of America overnight to get involved in World War II. On December 8th, 1941, the United States of America officially joined World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor. The USA declared war on Japan, Germany, and Italy. And the United States of America being one of the strongest countries in the world at the time, that is absolutely terrifying for Japan, Germany, and Italy. Essentially, Japan had poked the bear, and you're never meant to poke the bear. And within months, the tide of the war began to shift in the Allies' favour. And of course, within 4 years, Japan's gamble ended in devastation with the 2 nuclear bombs dropped on Japan, essentially putting an end to the war. So it just shows, just because something worked in the short term definitely doesn't mean it's going to work in the long term, because this might be the worst long-term investment Japan could have made, because it ended in their demise. And if it wasn't for them attacking Pearl Harbor, I wonder where the world would be now, because we all could be speaking a different language. The famous saying of Japan won the battle, but they definitely lost the war. That's not a famous saying, I just made that up. And last but not least, we have the evacuation of Dunkirk in the 1940s. This evacuation is often referred to as a miracle that it even happened. But it only happened because of Nazi Germany's most baffling and confusing decision of the entire war. After a lightning-fast invasion on France, German armoured vehicles and troops tore through the English and French troops, pushing them all the way back to the English Channel. And this trapped nearly 400,000 soldiers between the sea and the Germans. And this was the small port town of Dunkirk. And at this point, the war in Western Europe could have theoretically ended, because the British army were tired, they were exhausted, and they were cornered. They didn't really have anywhere to go. They were pretty much sitting ducks. But then all of a sudden, the German advances just stopped. For reasons still unknown, most people are suggesting it's because of overconfidence of Hitler. The German tanks and armoured vehicles were ordered just miles away from Dunkirk to stop. And this gave the troops precious time to evacuate Dunkirk. As German bombers started attacking the beaches, the British launched Operation Dynamo. And Operation Dynamo was one of the craziest operations of the entire war. They got all of these troops out as fast as they possibly could, using any vessel necessary. They pulled warships, merchant boats, fishing boats, commercial boats, any boats that they could find anywhere near the coast were sent to Dunkirk to get as many troops out as possible. Civilian crafts were literally going into the heat of battle to save our troops. It is truly extraordinary. Over 9 days of constant attacking, over 330,000 troops were evacuated from Dunkirk. And that's far more than anyone thought possible. Now sure, Dunkirk for the troops was definitely a defeat, but they got 330,000 troops out. And this psychologically was absolutely amazing for the British, because they thought that they were going to lose all of their troops and the war was going to end. But it didn't end that way. The rescued soldiers became the core of the British army that defended Britain. But that moment of hesitation of Hitler ordering his troops to stop saved the war. And that's why Dunkirk remains one of the most important places of World War II. But that's about it. They were the biggest mistakes in war that cost countries a lot, essentially. Make sure to like, subscribe. Oh, one more thing. Bye.